economy, in Unit 5, up till now we have talked about the basics of industrial policy and what all areas does it cover. We have talked about industrial policy of 1956 in detail, and then we moved over to discussion on industrial policy of 91 in detail. We talked about LPG, and then we talked about the provisions regarding the public sector enterprises and the private sector enterprises. We talked about how trade liberalization was introduced and Indian economy became more integrated with the global economy. And we also talked about the failures where all the industrial policy of 1991 has not been able to achieve the desired results. Today we are going to discuss another new topic, which will be industrial sickness in India. And in these 3 sessions that we'll be discussing this particular topic, we'll be talking about the meaning of industrial sickness, and then we'll move over to the causes of industrial sickness. We'll talk about external and internal causes, and then we'll talk about how does it impact the economy, industrial sickness and the instances of industrial sickness, how do they impact the economy, and we'll talk about some preventive measures as well. Now, what do we mean by industrial sickness? You can have a look at this particular picture which has been shown on the right side of the slide. A particular industry has to close down, or it is operating and continuously incurring losses. Now, this is what industrial sickness is all about. Continued losses endangering the viability of firm. So, continuously a particular firm is making losses, and because of which it is no more viable. It cannot continue for long. It cannot continue its operations for long. Then it is known as an instance of industrial sickness. Now, please understand that loss in a particular year, or maybe in 2 or 3 years in a row, may happen because of various developments in the economy. For example, if you talk about 2020-21 financial year, many industries incurred losses. The reason was that there was the corona pandemic, because of which most of the economic activities had to be shut down. So that is perfectly fine. But if these losses continue for a longer period of time, beyond 2-3 years, maybe 5 years, 6 years, then it becomes difficult for the particular enterprise to generate sufficient resources to keep paying salaries to its employees, to keep paying the suppliers for the products bought from them, and to also promote the product and to distribute the product to the customer. So then it becomes very, very difficult for such industries to survive, and that is what is known as industrial sickness. RBI has its own definition of what industrial sickness is, because RBI cannot go by subjective definitions, so they have come up with very, very objective definitions. Now, according to Reserve Bank of India, RBI, the banking regulator in India, a particular industry, a particular company which has incurred cash loss in a particular year and is likely to continue to incur losses in the next 2 years as well. So a company has incurred cash loss in a particular year, and in the next 2 years also it is likely that it will incur losses. Then it would be termed as a sick enterprise. If the current ratio falls below 1:1, I hope you remember current ratio is current assets but divided by current liability. Now, if this ratio falls below 1:1, what do we mean by this? This basically means that the current assets would be less than the liabilities, and then again the industry can be said to be a sick one. If the debt equity ratio is worsening, you know that the ideal debt equity ratio is 2:1. Now, if this worsens further, if this ratio worsens, and what do we mean by worsens? The debt proportion in the overall mix increases, and if this ratio worsens to 3:1, which means 3 parts debt and 1 part equity, then this is a symptom of a industry probably going sick. Then borrower account remains NPA for 3 years. So for example, if a particular firm has procured some loan from a bank and they have not been able to make repayments for 3 years, then that particular amount would be termed by the bank as a non-performing asset. Non-performing means that asset from which we are not able to get any returns. And why do we call the loans given by banks as an asset? Because when they give loans to people, people return the loan, the principal amount as well as the interest. So this is how they earn, and that is why such loans are known as assets. If the borrower is not repaying the loan, then it would be known as a bad debt, a bad asset, or a non-performing asset. Non-performing would mean here that the assets are not able to bring the desired amount of interest or desired amount of revenue to the bank. So if the borrower account remains NPA for 3 years, again a particular firm is considered to be sick. And if the accumulated loss erode 50% of the net worth in previous accounting year, what do we mean by this? Net worth is the net value of all your assets, right? And if the accumulated loss, if the losses are so high that the value of these losses is much more than the half of the value of the overall worth of the industry, then this is considered to be a case of industrial sickness. Let me give an example. Let's say a particular enterprise is worth rupees 100. Just to give you an example, it's a hypothetical case. And now 50% of this 100 is rupees 50. If the amount of loss that a particular company incurs, that this particular company incurs, is more than rupees 50, then this would be considered to be an instance of industrial sickness. Right? So these were the definitions given by the Reserve Bank of India. Now let us look at the aspect of this change in the definition from time to time. So these definitions keeps changing from time to time. So when you are looking at these definitions to categorize the various firms into sick and non-sick, then you please look at the latest definitions by RBI and don't go by the definitions of 2016 or 2010 or 2014. Look for the latest definitions and then you can easily categorize whether a particular firm has turned sick. Now we used to have another law which was known as Sick Industrial Companies Act of 1985. So Sick Industrial Companies Act, many a times it is known by the abbreviation SICA, SICA. So according to this particular act, in this particular act, who is defined as a sick enterprise? An enterprise which has suffered loss in the immediately preceding financial year, which means the last financial year. So for example, if you are talking about 2021-22, then the immediately preceding financial year is 2020-21, 1st of April 2022, 31st March 2021. Now if the particular company has suffered loss in that particular year, it would be termed as a sick enterprise. And if the accumulated losses, accumulated means total losses, are more than the entire net worth, more than 100% of the net worth, then again particular enterprise would be treated as a sick enterprise. Just like the case with RBI only said that 50% of the net worth. If the accumulated losses are more than 50% of the net worth, the firm would be categorized as sick. But they are saying if accumulated losses are more than the 100%, entire means full, complete, 100% of the net worth, then only the company would be considered to be industrially sick. That particular industry would be considered to be sick. However, let me tell you that this particular law was also repealed in 2016. So now, to make such categorizations, you simply cannot bank on such laws because now they have been repealed in 2016. Right? Let us now start talking about the symptoms of industrial sickness. Fine? And why is it important for us to understand the symptoms? Because if we understand the symptoms, we can forecast that a particular industry is not performing well and it may become sick in the time to come. And once we are able to forecast this thing well in time, it would help us to accordingly modify our course of action, accordingly modify our strategy towards that particular company. And the company itself can understand that they might become sick in a few years and they might themselves kick in some preventive measures. The banks would also be able to understand that a particular firm might turn sick in a few years, and then they would probably not want to allow loans to such firms. Now, what are the various other symptoms? We need to understand the symptoms, because understanding the symptoms will help all the three entities, the banks, the firms themselves, as well as the management of the firm. So, what are the symptoms? Lack of funds to meet short-term obligations. Short-term obligations, what do we mean by that? Short-term obligation, one example could be the monthly electricity bill. One example could be the monthly water bill. Right? If these kind of obligations are not met, which means that the company does not have the money to meet such obligations, to pay such fees or to pay such amount, then this is an example of a symptom of the industry not being in a great state, and of it being likely to become sick in the future years. Again, inability to return loan interest on time. Many a times, various firms, because of their worsening situation, they are simply not able to return the loan that they have borrowed from somebody, that they have borrowed from some bank or some entity, some non-banking financial company. So they would probably not be able to return the loan also, and they would many a times delay the repayment of the monthly installments. They would ask for change in the deadlines. They would ask for the deadlines to be extended so that they can pay loans later also. So all these kind of things happen. And why are these things happening? Because the particular firm is not able to generate sufficient revenue, because they are not able to perform well, and they are not able to generate sales. Now, if they are not able to generate sales, generate revenue, how would they be having the money to make loan repayments? So they would not be able to repay the loans, and this gives us another indication. This is another symptom that the industry might go sick in future. Delay in payment of statutory dues. So if you look at all these three things, they're all talking about delay in some kind of obligations, delay in payment of some obligations. For example, here you are not paying the short-term obligations, you are not meeting the short-term obligations, you are not able to make the payments. Here you are not returning the loan or the interest. Here you are not paying the statutory dues. Statutory dues are dues which are mandated by law. For example, in India, the Provident Fund Act mandates the employer to open up a Provident Fund account with Employee Provident Fund organization for all its employees. Not only this, they also have the authority to deduct a particular portion, again which has been specified by the law, what is the percentage of the portion that would be deducted. So they have the authority to deduct that particular portion from the salary of their employee and deposit it with Employee Provident Fund organization. This is what we mean by payment of statutory dues. So the money has to be deposited with the Provident Fund, Employee Provident Fund organization, and a matching contribution is also to be made by the employer. I have discussed this point earlier also. For example, if the employer is deducting ₹50 and let's say I am a blue collar worker, I fall in the category of workers from which the Provident Fund deduction has to be made. So supposing I fall in this category, so what will be the employer doing? It will deduct some portion of my salary. For example, let's say they might deduct ₹100 from my salary, and now again what percentage would be deducted is specified in the law, and they would have to make a matching contribution ₹100. So ₹200 now would be deposited in my Provident Fund organization, Provident Fund account, which is maintained with the Employee Provident Fund organization. Now this is what we mean by statutory dues. But many a times these companies, they deduct the money as PF contribution from the employee, but they do not deposit it with the Employee Provident Fund organization because they are suffering a crunch of money, a lack of revenues. They are not able to generate sufficient amount of revenue. So what would they do? They delay such payments, and this gives us another indication that the industries might go sick, that particular industrial enterprise might go sick. Again, another kind of statutory dues is ESI. It is basically one kind of a insurance. Again, some contribution is taken from the worker and matching contribution is made by the employer, and then this amount is deposited in a particular account which the worker can access in times of some health emergency, right? Or they can access health services in times of health emergency. So that is what is known as ESI, Employee State Insurance. So these companies are, when they are about to go sick, they simply do not have the revenue, do not have the resources available to pay such statutory dues. Statutory, as I said, means the dues which are mandated by law. Then there is decline in capacity utilization. What do we mean by this? See, how will decline in capacity utilization happen? For example, let's say if a particular firm has the capacity to produce 1 lakh vehicles, 1 lakh cars in a particular year, but they are only able to produce 60,000. So they are only using how much of the capacity? 60%. So capacity utilization is just 60%. But why is this the case? This is the case because they are not able to sell their product in the market. Had they been able to sell their product, they would have had a lot of demand, and then they would have produced all 1 lakh of the vehicles, and the capacity utilization would have been 100%. But since here they are not able to sell all the vehicles, so they are producing at a much slower rate, and to produce at a much slower rate, we can say when they are producing at a slower rate, they are not able to utilize their capacities completely. So the capacity utilization has, in this particular example that I have discussed, decreased from 100 to 60%. Many a times in such enterprises, the breakdowns, I hope you know what do we mean by breakdown, when the production line has to be stopped because a particular machine has broken down, because a particular machine has not been working properly. So you have to stop the production line and you have to tend to that particular machine, you have to take care of that particular machine, do the maintenance and the servicing work so that it is up and running again. So these kind of things also happen in sick enterprises. So because of these breakdowns, the production stoppages also take place. Then many a times the production gets delayed. Why would the production get delayed? A sick enterprise is not able to pay to its suppliers. The suppliers then decide not to supply raw material to these firms. Why? Because these firms are not paying them on time. So now what will happen, since these firms, they do not have access to regular supply of raw material, they would not be able to produce at a faster clip and their production schedules would get delayed. Then there would also be a decline in quality because the focus on the quality would no longer be there when a particular firm is sick, and that is why there would be a decline in quality, and ultimately the decline in quality would lead to a reduction in market share, and reduction in market share would ultimately lead to decline in capacity utilization. There would be high turnover, which means there would be so many people who would quit such firms and they would look for greener and safer pastures in other parts of the country or in other parts of the world. So there would be high turnover. High turnover is percentage of people who leave your organization because of some voluntary reasons, or maybe because they've been fired or they've been asked to leave, etc., etc. So that is what turnover is, and turnover is generally higher in industrial enterprises which are sick. And then they are also submitting the data to the bank with great delay. Now why do they need to submit data to the bank? Because in many cases it is the bank which provides them loan, and since the bank provides them loan, it is the authority of the bank to have a look at the various performance indices of that particular firm. And how do they do that? They ask these firms to provide this data to them. Fine. But since this particular firm is going sick, then at times they would be submitting the data late also. Then there would be delay in audits also. Delay in audits generally happen because there is something that a particular firm wants to hide. And so they delay audits. Audits are many times conducted by in-house team also, but they are also conducted by people from outside. And the whole idea behind delaying the audit is to not let the shortcoming become public, not let the financial embezzlement, if it has happened, financial mismanagement come to light, and that is why audits are also delayed in such enterprises. Now friends, tomorrow we will be discussing industrial sickness, the external as well as the internal.